this fancy thing on. All right, we good, Jishnu? Cool. All right, let's get started. So, thank you, Robin, for introducing me. And we got this all set up, too. But before I begin, I would really like to take this time to thank the faculty that have really helped me put this project together. I am lucky to have worked with such intelligent people trying to develop these ideas and understand something that is so normal to us, but when you look at it from afar, is pretty abnormal. So I'd like to thank Lisa Anderson-Levy, my advisor. She just left, so she can't hear my thank you, but as well as Catherine Orr, who is the second reader of my thesis, which this project comes from, as well as our moderator, Robin Zabrowski, who really helped me put these ideas together and make sense of, the types of language we use around Facebook, and also some ideas about embodiment that I'll go into. All right. So, the power Facebook holds in the lives of many people is phenomenal. Competing websites like Twitter, Pinterest, and Tumblr are becoming more popular, but Facebook remains the favored social network in the US. Users have the option to post photos, videos, links, and personal statuses that tell others what they are thinking or doing. Users are able to comment and like their friends' posts to show their engagement. This paper focuses on Facebook as a cultural product. I first recognized this while studying abroad on the main island of independent Samoa. I became Facebook friends with other students from Samoa, Fiji, and Tonga, and noticed that they used their profiles a little bit differently than my friends did back home. Instead of using the profile picture to show a picture of themselves, they used it to show newborn infants, relatives who had recently passed, or a photo of their friends. I had always been familiar with using the profile picture to only show myself, even cut others out if I have to. But my Pacific friends were using it differently. Facebook is a cultural product because people make the site, as my Pacific friends had very distinct understandings and motives for using it. Once we recognize Facebook as a cultural product, we can use anthropological methods to investigate the shared understandings of the communities that it supports. When I returned from abroad, I became aware of how people used the word virtual to describe their online experiences and the word real to indicate offline experiences, treating them as necessarily separable and unrelated. Assumptions like these are based on the fact that the internet operates without physical bodies. Internet spaces like Second Life, as Bohlsdorf describes, allows users to adopt identities that may or may not reflect them in offline spaces. This has led people to claim that these identities are caricatures and somehow imaginary, and therefore less real. This research seeks to deconstruct normative assumptions about the real and virtual worlds, and show that they are crucially dependent on one another. I will use the example of self-esteem on Facebook to show the significant effect this website can have on a young adult's concept of self. My claim that the real and virtual worlds are related rests in identity development. I believe that all identities are performed, which means that Facebook identities aren't unassociated. I use the term performed in a similar way to Bauman, as situated, interactional, and communicatively motivated. I can choose to exhibit some identities while making others discrete. This purposeful and often conscious approach to expressing oneself is what I will call self-presentation. Users can present themselves by listing tastes in music, posting statuses, or posting photographs of themselves and their friends. Zhao et al. Found that this is the manner that users prefer, to show rather than tell their identities. Because of the nature of the Facebook profile, the user often regulates identities in a very conscious way. Users develop what I will call a self-concept, a sort of amalgamation of identities, defined by Zhao et al. As the totality of a person's thoughts and feelings in reference to oneself as an object. Self-concepts are shaped as pictures, comments, and other information are added by other people and for other people. Self-esteem makes up a large part of the self-concept. The ways other Facebook users interact with a profile can affect levels of self-esteem, such as commenting negatively or positively on a post. Because on and offline identities are connected, a like or a comment holds significant value to a user's level of self-esteem. Researchers Ellison et al. Showed that users typically utilize Facebook to interact with friends and acquaintances with whom they shared an offline community. What this means is that a high number of likes on a post could raise a user's self-esteem, which she may carry into her offline identities. In a small geographic community that also exists on Facebook, these effects on self-esteem would be observable in offline contexts as a direct effect of an online event. Because Facebook is a cultural product, anthropological study is relevant. Personal opinions and narratives about Facebook can provide information about the human experience of the site and the positive and negative effects it can have on an individual. This research took place at a small liberal arts college in the US, similar to Beloit College, where I conducted interviews with junior and senior students regarding their personal experiences with Facebook. Because these students lived and operated within a small campus community, I intended to show the complexity of interactions between geographic and internet spaces. I interviewed and recorded 6 students total, 3 men and 3 women. All names have been changed in this presentation. It is important to note that I am also a Facebook user. I access the site at least once a day and spend most of my time scrolling through the newsfeed feature. I post things a few times a month and enjoy using it to stay in touch with friends. I was able to speak the same language of Facebook with my informants, using words such as like, stalk, and unfriend without having to extrapolate those concepts. In my thesis, I covered topics such as the novelty of Facebook, self-presentation on Facebook, self-esteem seen through Facebook, internet harassment and anonymity, social pressures to maintain a profile, and Facebook as a campus space. So for the purposes of this presentation, I will be exploring self-presentation, self-esteem, and Facebook as a campus space, but I encourage you to get in touch with me after the panel if you're interested in those other topics. The students I interviewed most often use the words real and virtual to distinguish between the way individuals present themselves on versus offline. That it was too deliberate and therefore less genuine. One student, Henry, illuminates a difference in intention between Facebook and offline identities. Quote, "In Facebook, everything has deliberate thought behind it, even if you didn't quite realize it at the time. If you think that this is something you want to share with the world, you can delete it later, and I think that's more deliberate. Face-to-face interactions are more improvised, and Facebook is more scripted." Some, like Alden, see the Facebook self as inauthentic and counterfeit. When asked, "Do you think what people put on their profile reflects who they are?" Alden responded, "Oh, absolutely not, 0%. People's Facebook profiles are a lie about who they really are. People will only post good things that happen to them. They'll show their happiest pictures of all their best friends when they're at parties, but you never see anyone post a picture of themselves in their bed because they're so depressed they can't get out." Facebook interactions are certainly different than those that happen offline, and these students could articulate those differences. The argument I am making is not that Facebook is somehow produced without the user's intent, but rather that all identities are performative in nature, and therefore Facebook represents a very real part of a person. Rose knows her audience when posting to Facebook and conceals certain aspects of her identity that she might not want that audience to hear. Quote, "I don't post things that could get me in trouble. Most of the things I hide from my family are things that are a part of my life that I don't want them to know about." Henry did this as well, using her ability to show rather than tell her identity, and therefore control others' perceptions of her. Quote, "At one point, I went through and deleted some of my favorite television shows because I felt awkward that my book section wasn't as robust. There's definitely times where I felt self-conscious because people would judge it." The Facebook user must be very conscious of their audience if she wishes to fully control her identity, but nonetheless, it is still identity regulation. Despite the demarcation of Facebook experiences from offline experiences, the students I interviewed had easily retrievable examples of moments when they experienced something validating or hurtful on Facebook. The students were especially aware of their desire for likes. They each had a unique threshold that distinguished too few from just enough. Sometimes it was not about how many likes you get, but as Grace said, who liked it. John was able to quantify his threshold. Quote, "I think the rule me and my friends have is, if you expect it to get fewer than 20 likes, no one's going to care." The students also recalled validating experiences, like Henry. Quote, "I also love it when I get random likes from photos that I put up months ago because I'm like, I know they're technically Facebook stalking me right now, but oh my gosh, yay." Negative experiences for most of the students were easily recalled. They remembered comments that hurt their self-esteem and made them more self-conscious to operate in the community that they were in. Andy stated, quote, "There was one confessions post in particular that was about me. For the next day or two, I was a little quieter than usual. It made me uncomfortably conscious of myself and the way other people perceived me." If the Facebook identity is truly missing the purest, rawest form of a person, then why is it so easy for us to be affected by retaliation to this so-called non-real self? A dominant discourse told them that the Facebook self was illegitimate, but their experiences showed that this is truly not the case. Students talk about Facebook posts in everyday conversations, both in and out of class. It is used to solidify existing offline relationships and immediately connect the campus community. The students noticed how often the website was discussed around their campus. Quote, "More often than not, people will start conversations based on articles they saw on people's Facebook walls, on articles they posted on Facebook, based on something they saw on a status update. Pictures will spark little gossip trails. I think Facebook has become a part of the social scene here." Alden is a student who deleted his Facebook profile his sophomore year of college, and he sometimes felt alienated from his campus community. Quote, "I felt like once I deleted it, I would be missing out on everything. I wouldn't know what was going on ever, completely out of the social loop. I was even worried people wouldn't be interested in being my friend in real life, because it's like, what's the point of being friends with them if you can't tag them in a picture?" These were serious concerns of mine. It is worth considering why they continued to segregate the real from the virtual, while at the same time articulating the connection between them. Based on the research I conducted, I am calling for a shift in scholarly inquiry regarding the internet generally and Facebook specifically. As shown through the constructions of self-esteem, the so-called real and virtual worlds are clearly coupled, such that these terms are too reductive and don't describe a user's actual experience. It is worth noting that we should not expect folk language to change significantly. Using real and virtual to describe the elusive differences between the worlds is too convenient for people to desire change. However, with these narratives in mind, individuals may be able to more easily consider bodies behind and within those computer screens. Embodiment is a critical part of expressing and maintaining relationships, but the Facebook body looks and operates in abnormal ways. Physical embodiment is too reductive of a way to determine the legitimacy of identities. Instead, embodiment on Facebook might take the form of posting a picture or commenting on another user's status. We ought to question our presumptions about the body in its entirety. When we refer to the body, we often think of a very particular kind of body. We can easily identify broken bodies, abnormal bodies, and attractive bodies. We grant legitimacy to some over others. In today's world, bodies that require hearing aids to hear are damaged and defective. In the same world, bodies that need eyeglasses to see are ordinary and uninhibited. But concepts of body have changed through time. The idea that body equals physical rests on the claims made by philosopher René Descartes, who is famous for establishing an academic distinction between the mind and the body. But the mind-body problem heralded this real virtual problem. It has allowed us to ignore the internet human because there is no fleshy body in front of us. But like the Facebook identity, not all embodied identities are physical. It might seem as though a fleshy human animal is discontinuous and absolute, yet so much of our experiences is not locatable within our fleshy bodies that we require a shift in limitations around the entire concept of body. If we claim that the body is always physical when there is no physical body present, like on the internet, the people with whom we interact become imaginary. The internet has disrupted our concept of physical space by invading our bodies and evading our bodies. Philosopher Andy Clark, author of Natural Born Cyborgs, provides some relief from this mind-body split. It is simply this: we are the tools we use. We are not born using tools, but when we learn to use them, they fade into our bodies, and we become the self as we develop an ever-growing knowledge of the world. He provides an excellent example of how extensions of embodiment have existed long before the internet, and through human tool use in general. Quote, "The accomplished writer, armed with pen and paper, usually pays no heed to the pen and paper tools while attempting to create an essay or a poem. They have become transparent equipment, tools whose use and functioning have become so deeply dovetailed to the biological system. In the context of the moment, there is no practical distinction between the pen in hand and the writer using it." Clark's cyborg ideas certainly address our use of material tools like pens, laptops, and smartphones, but something like Facebook? Where and what is Facebook? One way of making sense of the differences between tools like laptops versus websites is what Sonneson terms transitory and enduring artifacts. Devices like laptops are material and enduring, and could be preserved in familiar ways, as most cultural products could. Facebook as a website on the internet is a time-dependent, transitory artifact. But I do not mean to discard one label for another. Sonneson's terminology is useful to grasp these troubling concepts, but it does not fully capture the essence of all artifacts. Facebook is not entirely transitory because remnants of information exist without the use of a device. As another example, a guitar is an enduring artifact, and its music is a transitory artifact. but remnants of its music might be found as a tune trapped in someone's head. As a person hums the tune, the so-called transitory artifact escapes its enduring artifact. Similar residues of information exist on websites like Facebook, surviving somewhere without time or space. However, Sonneson's terms provide us with a new way of understanding cultural products and further allow us to discard physicality as a requirement of embodiment. Call them virtual, prosthetic, or artificial. These terms are mere distinctions, but our tools are intrinsically connected to us and, in fact, make us us. As a social network, the anthropological work to be done on Facebook is inexhaustible, and we must begin to revise previously understood concepts in order to include the internet domains. Facebook bodies and other internet bodies are built from the synthesis of human and tool, and are the literal sites at which these interactions occur. Although our Facebook bodies and the identities that inhabit them are built from existing forms of communication, they should by no means replace our physical bodies. Because we are living shapeshifters, the totality of all of our identities, one embodied identity should not substitute another. If we are able to fully recognize the legitimacy of these Facebook persons and all that they are, harmful internet interactions could be avoided. Thank you. Thanks, guys. So, any questions? Yeah, Kelsey.
How did you find your informants and pick them? Why were they juniors and seniors for the most part?
I will answer the second part of that question first. Why juniors and seniors? I was really looking to show the connection between campus communities and online communities, and I figured that junior and senior students will have had more exposure to their campus community. Not that freshmen and sophomores don't have a similar type of exposure, but I just wanted to be sure. And I got in contact with them by finding a random email generation list that was connected to their .edu email, and basically found 3 men and 3 women by randomly selecting emails. Yeah.
Did you study like college confession pages at all, and how that like plays a role into like not just like Facebook and the concept of the self, but especially in college?
Right. I didn't look so specifically at confessions pages because honestly I kind of wanted to stay away from this sticky subject of confessions. But I did talk a little bit about it, especially in that topic of internet harassment and anonymity. And I was asking people, you know, what do you think gives people the power to be so cruel in those spaces? And anonymity came up a lot as this sort of veil that people could use as, you know, separating themselves from these persons that they might be affecting, which was so interesting because even those people who were expressing that the veil would cover them up had had hurtful experiences on Facebook. So it was kind of a vicious cycle, but yeah. Other questions? Grace?
I don't know if this was the focus or any focus of your thesis, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the intersections between having an online identity and internet addiction.
That's a good thing to bring up because I've even had friends of mine personally who, you know, get sucked into their online identities and might use it as a coping mechanism for problems or events that are going on in their offline identities. But very much, sometimes it can be used as, you know, in a similar way to the way that we use offline identities. You know, there might be a certain part of yourself that you know, jump to in times of stress or anxiety or anything like that. And I wonder if it's similar to that, where, you know, as seeking comfort in an identity that you know will present something positively about yourself. So, you know, I didn't focus on that specifically, but I'd really like to look more into that. Matt.
So what do you think about the correlation with this, with people who report such things as like trolling, going online and harassing people or kind of prodding people looking for conflict? Or also people who create false identities, as in like not their name, not their background, and go into chat rooms, or I'm sure they do it on Facebook or not, but perhaps done that as well.
Right. I actually looked a little bit into that and found So specifically with Facebook, though, you know how people often assume that the Facebook person is, totally far from what we are in offline contexts? There was research done on Facebook profiles, I think 300 different Facebook profiles, and the individuals that owned them, I guess, and found that their Facebook profile actually represented a more similar type of person to their offline identities than most people assume, which was surprising for me because, we talk about it as if it's someone totally different, but very few people will blatantly lie about their identities. But in other spaces, I think of 4chan and other, types of websites where anonymity is, the central focus. And I would still say that even if it doesn't physically reflect someone's offline identities, it says a lot about who they are as a person. The certain types of things that they want to put out, the certain types of appearances they're seeking. But, I didn't look into that specifically, but again, this is such a wide scope of research, and I really hope to actually continue this with graduate school. Yeah, Dory. The point of this project was a little bit more for people to sit down and listen to me in the first place, to be like, this is a legitimate thing to study. But with regards to that, I really think that actually, will you repeat your question? I want to make sure I'm answering it correctly.
Defend yourself from
Right.
abuse on Facebook,
Right. So my intent with this is really starting with education in terms of opening up your eyes to begin with and say, wow, these are real people I'm interacting with. And I'm really trying to encourage at least myself and my friends to stop using terms like real and virtual to describe those things, because when you use the word real to say, offline, I'm a real person, that totally negates any experience that you or anyone else has had on the internet. But those are very real experiences. And so, like I was kind of saying, we can't expect folk language to change that much, but I hope that even by showing you these quotes, you will now go onto Facebook and think about it a little bit differently, think about these people a little bit differently. So basically, I don't know if there's a really concrete way to avoid it, but I just hope that people with these narratives in mind will remember that. Yeah, Steve.
Over 20 years ago, there was an article published called Rethinking Cyberspace. It was about sort of this before Second Life existed. There was a massive online game that people played called Beloit, and one user essentially, through the use of just text, raped another user in this cyberspace, and it sort of brought up all these kind of questions. Why do you think even 20 years later, there's still really not a lot of discussion about this?
Right. And again, I think that really rests on people totally disregarding what happens on the internet, that it's not something that should even be considered. And Robin's actually told me some stories about harassment over Twitter or even YouTube comments, and even blatant death threats, where people will go to the police department and say, I was threatened over the internet, and the police will just be like, ugh, whatever, just ignore them then. Where it's not taken as seriously, whereas if someone hand wrote a note with a death threat, that would be taken more seriously at a place like the police department. So I do think that it's still resting on this separation of virtual from real, where it's like, well, that's not real, that can't be real rape if it's just textual in cyberspace. But I think that could have some pretty detrimental effects on someone. That's a great question. For those of you who don't know, I've been working on this since September, officially, but I've been thinking about it for a lot longer. But yes, I've noticed some pretty significant changes in the way I use Facebook. I don't take it as seriously. And I never had a motive to be like, I'm going to delete my Facebook. How horrible is it? Look at all these bad things that are happening to all these people. But in fact, I had the opposite reaction, where I was like, I do like this website. It gives us really good things. It gives us a great way to communicate with people from afar. But yeah, I stopped kind of, when you're scrolling through your newsfeed and you see someone that you often compare yourself to, or you look at their photos and they make you feel bad, That happened to me a lot more before than it does now. I'm a lot more conscious of when I start to do that to myself, when I start to use Facebook as a negative sort of reinforcer of things that I already have issues with, and kind of just backed off from it. But yeah, that's a good question. All right, I think our time is up. Thank you.